So, all right. Well, let's start that again because just to let the fans know we lost signal. So we're gonna start this, and hey, if there's some repeat, so be it. You can always hit the fast forward on the podcast.
Don't you dare!
No. So I think we were talking about some of the format. What was it?
Well, there are a lot of format fans now, right? And this is something that Dan and I started to encounter, where there were people who wanted physical media in the age of streaming because they felt they could own it, right? And so Warner Archive was there to get more new release, less films, but more TV shows that just weren't going to wind up at like a Best Buy or a Target.
Yeah.
And now, since Dan and I mean, there was a little bit of it there, but now people have really moved more into 4K. Dan, have you moved to 4K?
Well, it's interesting you bring up the 4K thing and formats and streaming because, as we know, this is sort of working from the current era backwards.
Yeah.
There's a lot of recent concern about how do you access films moving ahead because various services are. There was an idea that people had that eventually you would just, and if I don't know if Tim remembers back in 2014 the so-called Streamageddon.
Which, Tim wouldn't, and that I think that was 2013, to be honest.
Yeah, but so it's funny because it all came true later. But right when we were launching Warner Archive Instant, the then streaming side for Warner Archive,
Warner Brothers' first subscription video on demand service.
Netflix on its own had decided to not to allow the window to expire on an enormous quantity of catalog titles they had licensed, not just from Warner Brothers, but from the other studios too, because Netflix was moving into more original production and they wanted to become what they are now. But so instead of being the online version of Netflix by mail, they were becoming Netflix the studio. So while we were launching Warner Archive Instant, Netflix was dropping a lot of old catalog titles, and people on the internet assumed that we were pulling the titles in order to artificially inflate Warner Archive Instant, and it became, you could do searches for it, it became known online as Streamageddon. And it was like, look at what they're doing to us to try to force us. They got to understand people just want one streaming service. And then, of course, by 2023, we have more streaming services than you can count and even more growing fast channels, and catalog is still getting lost. And yet, on the other hand, it's worthy to note that shows that were designed to be fan friendly for streaming are now coming out on disc. And at the same time, a blockbuster film was recently released on 4K, and Sony's had to tell everyone, "Don't worry, we have more coming," because it's
demand.
Oppenheimer has actually sold out at a number of retailers. I mean, there's more coming, but the point being, there was always this weird idea that the pie was changing and you couldn't have these different slices. And it's like, no, the pie just grows. All of this stuff is additive. None of it is, it's not cannibalizing sales. You're growing different ways for people to experience stuff. You just have to make it all work together.
That's such a great point. And you just reminded me, I remember not the day, but I remember sitting in marketing meetings and it dawned on us one day that, wait a second, putting the TV shows from the CW on Netflix, which we thought was going to be the death of our home entertainment income for those shows, it brought a whole new audience to those shows. So the shows prospered because then the broadcast numbers the next year or the next season went up. But not only that, people then wanted to buy and own the show and go back. And it's like, well, but they could just watch it on streaming. Yes, but a percentage of them are physical media collectors and they want to own the shows. So it was that kind of the rising tide lifts all boats. And that's why I was always scratching my head over the last few years when people were cutting home entertainment departments. I'm like, well, you're just getting rid of the people who know how to keep making some money coming in.
Right.
And we all know that the big thing for Wall Street is cash flow. Can you show cash flow? Home entertainment was cash flow. TV was cash flow.
That's the money machine.
Films were a tougher cash flow because they go up and down. But you could be like every quarter home entertainment is selling. People are they're either buying online and you're cutting your cash flow.
Yeah.
And so it's a great point you bring up.
Yeah, and in terms of it being a catalog business, home entertainment allows you to refresh the catalog, and I mean that in a technical way, to make new masters that you're then paying for with the physical release, but those new masters then become an instrument you can use to spread it through commercial, linear, fast, streaming, whatever, but you have a new high-definition master, you're future-proofing the catalog, and the catalog is, when you have 100 years of good stories, let them live. I mean, there's a thing I remember back in the 90s, you would hear back when if you went to Comic-Con, for instance, you would be probably 80% male, and you would talk to comic book publishers and the marketing people would say things like, well, girls don't like comics. And I would just sit there and go, it's a medium. It's not, it's like, no, girls don't like your comics. And then, of course, manga totally changed the dynamic there. And now it is solidly 50-50 because, yes, you know what? Everyone likes to read. It's like I had a friend in high school who used to say, I don't care for poetry as a genre. And I would just laugh at him because it doesn't make any sense. It's like, it's just stories. People say things like, young people don't like the pacing of old Hollywood films. And it's like, no, they're not used to it. Or, young people don't watch black and white movies. Yeah, because they've never seen them. And it's just like all of this stuff is just let it be there. Let people discover it on their own. Make it easy to discover. I was just on the radio today. They were interviewing the guy who wrote the TCM book on Christmas movies, and they talked about how, speaking of, we're living in an age where people are hiding movies as tax write-offs, which means nobody can ever see them, ignoring the fact that we have a history of movies like It's a Wonderful Life and Christmas Story that made all their money way down the line from theatrical release because they were just available on TV for people to find and enjoy because they're good stories. End of sermon.
Well, but as in a side commentary, there is, as Dan was saying, a difference between format and content. And working in a traditional media silo, it trains you, right? Like if you're in charge of this format, then you're thinking of it format first, right? And not content first. And that, unfortunately, in a business, it kind of puts blinders on you without understanding that all of it is kind of cross-pollinated, and that yes, people want more stuff in the best quality for as cheap as possible, right? Like that's pretty simple.
A fair description of a consumer.
Yeah,
yes.
thank you. This is my business book. And but the studio's job is now, especially that every single person is walking around with a device that can shoot, edit, and publish anything to a worldwide audience in minutes or in real time, right? Like they can real time stream it. The studio's job is to figure out how to take their investment and feed it to the right person at the maximum cost at the right time. right? And so that's windowing. And that's something that the business was very good at for a long time. But then, just as we were starting, everybody's head exploded, and they all decided that the best way to make the most money as possible is to be like uh, the internet businesses, and to grow your audience without growing revenue. And that's a different business. HBO was the most profitable television station because they understood windowing, right? And you bring content in, you bring it out, you spend this much money, and they were spending money on new content for just Sunday night. And people then decided it was worth, 10, 15, $20, whatever they were spending a month, because they were feeling like, oh, this is HBO. But the reality, when HBO would look at what people were actually watching, they were watching things like Weekend Booby Summer 3, right? But they'd say that they bought it because they wanted, The Sopranos, right? And that difference was where they made all of their money. But when the internet people business came in and demanded that you have Sopranos every night, and the people who were running HBO said that is suicide and quit, well, historically, they've been proven right, because you have to think about these revenue models. And when you have less revenue, then eventually you're going to have less higher quality content, right? And so it becomes a loss for the audience as well, right? And so it's a business. Unfortunately, it's a business first, and it's art second.
Yeah. Well, I want to throw a couple of questions at you guys that I get a lot, that you probably used to get a lot, and maybe you still get a lot. But people who buy and are definite fans of the Warner Archive product. So, I mean, these are hardcore people. They're shelling out money, but they want to know, why this movie now, and why not the movie I want, or the top movies, and it's like, if Warner Brothers has 50 movies better than this one, why are you guys releasing it this month? What do you have to say to people who have that? Because I'm sure you hear it every month.
Well, there's a story behind each one, and sometimes this was like people would yeah, we would get hit with that all the time, and you would try to explain to them, like, look, our putting out Brothers Grimm actually has nothing to do with Raintree County. Like,
Right.
Raintree County is its own story, and there's issues with the element and the film that will or will not come together over time based on technology and available things. This film is ready to go, has decent elements, and we're able to release it. And then some other times it's like, oh, well, there was a list of films and they wanted to fulfill a thing, and this was at the top of the list. I mean, there's really, really mundane answers, and there's really, really technical answers, and it's all of the above always. But the simple answer is, these films are coming out because they can come out.
And Dan and I created a bunch of customer models. And there is a customer, and we sort of mentioned it with the burn pit mines was one answer, that I think they seem to think that there was like a room, and that you go and you pull a thing off a shelf, and then you put it in a machine and hit a button, and it's done. Right? Like that it's very simple and easy, and that the only reason why it's not all being done at once is due to greed, and that's a more sophisticated customer will understand that difference. And we very early on too, we said that like a physical media customer, like a hardcore customer, was more like the person who would show up to a record store, right? Like a vinyl collector. And people who want vinyl want to hold a thing. They understand its value. Its value is not just for the music inside, and not just for the weight of the vinyl, although that helps, or the quality of the giant package you get it in, but it represents something almost intangible to them that an MP3 cannot hold. And that customer is now your primary physical media customer. It's more like it's gone kind of a little back to Laserdisc, right?
Speaking of George,
yeah. Speaking of George, who, by the way, we're at the for commentary. It is the 40th anniversary of the first commentary this year, coming up with King Kong in 1984, the very first one. Piece of
That's the
trivia.
very first commentary, and it was on a Laserdisc?
Yeah, for Criterion. And it was because they discovered that they could have on that format an additional audio track, and it was originally designed for multiple language support. And they were like, well, what if we get some dude like who's really knowledgeable about film history to just talk? And the concept took off, right?
Well, I mean, it's not rocket science to think, hey, people like this film and they've liked it for 40 years. Let's have somebody talk about it who can tell us something about it. But the ability to technically put it together, that's, while you're watching the movie, that was pretty cool. To be like, okay, I can go to a lecture about this, or I can listen to it on the radio or whatever. But while I'm watching the film for the upteen time, so I don't need to hear the dialogue, they can talk about this scene, what's going on here, and the history behind it. And that, to me, that the first time you saw a commentary, you're like, that's kind of magical,
It's
and now we're all used to it. But
amazing. Yeah. And the thing is that, and living in a big city, we, in LA, you've always had access to special screenings where like the filmmakers would show up and maybe talk before or after the film and what it was like to put it together, right? That's a live commentary. But if you live, outside of New York or LA or maybe even Chicago, you never got access to that, right? Or you only got what was at the Blockbuster. People now, with discs and with all these streaming services, as long as you have an internet connection, you can get it streaming. And if you don't have an internet connection, because that's another large audience, you can get access to all these, all this material that you could not have gotten in any way in the past if you live, in the middle of the country.
Yeah, and it's speaking of not having internet access, it's also worthy to note that to serve a broad an audience of film fans as possible involves multiple avenues. Because I remember with Warner Archive, we would have the Blu-ray fans who wanted everything as good a master as possible on the best format possible. And God love them, yes, especially for certain movies like Peter Weir's Fearless or something like that. You want to, treat the movie the way it deserves. But then there was an older audience of monogram Western fans. They didn't need a Blu-ray. Not only that, some of them didn't want the Blu-rays. They were like, no, just DVD. I have a DVD player. I don't want Blu-ray. I just want the DVD. And quite honestly, there's room to serve both audiences and serve them well. And they're both physical media fans. The danger is when you confuse A for B.
Right. Like somebody who shows up to the film forum with somebody who wants to relive their Saturday morning matinee.
Yeah, exactly. And like the format and the technology should be robust enough to serve both audiences well instead of serving both of them not so well.
And
I want to take you back a little bit to the question that I threw out there, and I think that one of the thoughts is that somehow there's a big room. It's the library, and it's like, which one should we release this month? And you're like, oh, I'm gonna walk up here, I'm gonna grab it, and this is the one we're gonna release on Tuesday. And there's some mastermind, and you talked about how that's obviously, films are in different places, they're in different states of needing repair or restoration, and all of these things. And there's also the business side, which is our home entertainment group used to be broken into catalog, new release, television, animation. And they would be like, we want to have every week or every month, we want to serve X amount of the audience with releases. So in order to do that, we're not going to do all of the top all of the top catalog movies in black and white from the 30s and 40s. We need some stuff from the 60s. We need some stuff from the 90s. We need some TV. And so all of this is going on, and there's only so many resources, so much time from marketers, from the distributors to all the people who work there. And so you're only going to get one, maybe if you're interested is in a specific area, one a month that really appeals to you. But that's because the company is also trying to appeal to all of these other parts of the audience out there, which I think you explained, but I just wanted to kind of rehash that a little bit.
No, that was good.
It's
And the other
very
thing
important.
is, and to be clear, there is another side to it, which is, for example, what are we going to put out in October? What horror movies do we have in the pipeline that we can get done in time that there's an audience for? Let's have an 80s and let's have a 30s, and but even that selection, like, they're going to sell because it's Halloween, and to this day, discs for Halloween movies pump up in October, so you want to get those in the pipeline, but you also have to balance the cost of mastering versus the audience versus what's readily available, what's a bigger thing. Maybe we'll put this out as a test, and then down the line we can actually do the full thing. I mean, all of that calculation is constantly going on, and it is really more of an art than a science, but there is a science there too.
And that was George looked at it as programming, right?
Yeah.
It's no different than a TV channel or, like radio shows, right? Because it's like there's only so much information and money, right, and time that a consumer has. And so the Warner Archive program, which is still going on, is now stretched into its second decade, right? Like, how do you sustain that audience over time? And so as you guys were saying, there's a variety of consumers, a variety of tastes, a variety of genres, and you want to capture people's attention, right? Because it's now an attention economy every week or every month, and get people to engage with the product. And if you dumped 1,000 movies at once, right? Let's just say that 1,000 movies were dumped at one time, which would be kind of amazing in one sense, but
one might even call that the
it?
streaming model.
Well, but yeah, with streaming too, that they have this problem. It's like, how do you navigate it? And the streamers try to do that through algorithm, and if you're on the Roku, they say this is what's at the top, and there's even
there's still not an algorithm that is equal to the guy at the video store that is able to go, if you like that, you're gonna like this. The algorithm is just showing you variations on things you've seen. It's not showing you something you've never thought of seeing. You really still, maybe AI will get there. It's not there yet.
Right.
No.
Well, I put speaking of algorithm, and then we'll get back to that. So I was just posted on Facebook how the Maltese Falcon, which was on sale, showed in the algorithm, hey, if you like Maltese Falcon, you're going to like Scream 6. And I posted on there. I'm like, well, this is kind of a head scratcher. And I think what the algorithm was saying is this is on sale and this is on sale.
Yeah.
Well, that is not the way that the consumer is thinking, right? So sure, the algorithm is correct. A lot of people bought this because it's on sale, and they bought, Scream as well because it's on sale. But it's actually just that's not right, though. It's not.
Yep.
And then finally, once the sale was over, it went back to promoting the right movie with Maltese Falcon. But I'm like, the algorithm that's just kind of an interesting, funny side note. We can laugh about it, but that's where humans are better.
Yeah.
Oh, so not to brag, but a micro budget film that I produced and co-wrote was just released on Amazon. It's in the pay window. It's called Lunamancer, if you want to see it. But being part of Amazon, when you watch the film, and it's not a big budget film, there isn't a lot of information out there for the algorithm to digest, but it's very funny to see what they recommend, right? For that movie after you've seen it, what's similar. And the algorithm is so confused that it's just like, these actors were in these other things, so you may like, right? But it doesn't
Right.
even say that. But one of the actors was in a movie, a notorious film from 1980 called Cannibal Holocaust. So, but this movie has nothing to do with that, right? But their top recommendation is Cannibal Holocaust if you like this film. And then the next two movies are also cannibal movies. And so Lunamancer has no cannibalism. Nobody is
Yeah, but
actually eating anything.
but ironically, I'm wearing a shirt for the Beyond from Grindhouse Releasing, who also put out Cannibal Holocaust on Blu-ray. So, if you're a fan, I recommend both of them. In fact, I recommend every single title from Grindhouse Releasing. They're fantastic.
That's not paid. That's just you just
They're
did
just
that.
not paid. That's fan talk.
Dan and I have a lot of fan talk, which we can now do that we are free of our very, very rigid corporate NSAs. Is that right, Dan?
NDAs?
Oh, and see, I don't even know anymore. What
I
is
don't
that?
think I
A
think
non sneeze?
yeah, the NSA would not be involved.
No.
Yet.
What? Oh shoot! Did I leak
Uh,
something?
Yeah.
Well, to go back to what we were talking about, how you want to have something for the different various audiences. I remember one of the this time of year was very exciting at work because I knew that either in December or January, I think I would meet with marketing and they would lay out their plan for the year,
Yeah.
releases. And I'd be like, oh, I'm so excited for this meeting because they would tell me or tell us in the special features group, these are the films that we're going to put X amount of dollars to. And these are the films that have a slightly lesser budget, but still good. And then these we have no budget for extras, but we're still releasing these. And and then we would usually would have lunch and they would talk about, and we would just sit there and we'd be so excited. But I bring that up just to let the listeners and people know some of this planning is a year or more out because especially in television, you had so many episodes that had to be cleaned up of a show from the 70s or even 80s or Fresh Prince or whatever it was, that the plans had to be made, but they couldn't be made for this year unless they had been working on these TV titles for like 2 years before to get the episodes and find out what shape they're in. And the other thing that people don't think about for TV is all of the various languages around the world would have to be tracked down.
You
And that
guys
was
had to
not
do
always
that.
easy.
Yeah.
So, in other words, there was a long lead time for this stuff. It wasn't just like, snap your fingers and it's going to happen, because that information then had to be shared with retailers, right? And they would come back and say, "Ooh, we think that's a great title. We'll pre-buy X number." Again, this is for home entertainment where
Yeah.
they're already taking pre-orders and things a year out. So,
Manufactured goods.
yeah, exactly. So they would, one retailer saying, "We're going to take these many tens of thousands," and another, and then they would be like, that would be how they would base their budget for extras. Like
Right.
this is going to be a big title.
I mean,
So we're going to give you money for extras.
Home entertainment was kind of like being a Tesla dealer, and Warner Archive was kind of like being Uber Eats.
we used to
Means nothing. I'm just making a joke.
No, but when we worked for the digital division, we were one of the more successful products that they launched, because their job was sort of to kamikaze, like, try business ideas on digital and see what stuck. And this business was it stuck, right? They were very excited about it.
No, and the great breakthrough and insight that Mike, our old boss, had was expanding Warner Archive out of WB Shop and making it available at all online retailers that wanted to sell it. and suddenly the line grew by leaps and bounds because just because it was niche doesn't mean it had to be in a corner. I
But
can do a better job with that analogy, but
yeah, but then at like the end of 2015, Dan and I got rolled into home entertainment. And so we moved to a home entertainment floor, and all this stuff that, Tim, where we would just kind of hear about what you guys were doing, all of a sudden those meetings started to happen around us, and we were like, "Oh, these guys like because even though it had shrunk down by 2015, the system that you guys had was the like the $7 billion
I mean,
business system."
right. I mean, just like going to the approvals meetings for like the packaging, I was just like, just nothing but sympathy for
Oh my god.
it's so complicated.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I
I
mean,
mean,
we're really like pulling back the curtain, the
Yeah,
Wizard of Oz here, and getting get people a good exposure of how the business ran back then. But it doesn't run that way anymore. So we're not
no,
yeah,
really sharing anything that
yeah.
that is a secret or anything, because everything's changed and it's never going to run like that again.
Yeah.
no.
But the
Yeah.
the like to the packaging, there would literally be for television shows where there's 12 or 24 episodes, the packaging would be like 4 inches
Yeah.
because every page would be there, and I have to look at the cover, front cover, side cover, back cover, each disc. So if there's 24 discs or whatever it is, depending on how many discs there are, I should say, never 24. Let me back that off. There'd be like 3 episodes, 4 episodes, maybe if it's an hour to a disc.
Yeah, it depended on
So,
the size.
you know, and then we would do this for DVD, for Blu-ray, and it would all be in this packaging. You have to look
Man.
at it and review and put your notes on there and everything. And it would make multiple rounds. And you had X
Oh
number
yeah.
of days where you had to move it to the next. It was quite a thing, and whole teams of people, proofreaders and artists and other people working on that. So
Those
yeah,
those stacks would pile up outside George's office.
yes,
uh, and Dan and I would be like, "Oh my god!" I mean, and it really was. It took up like Dan. Didn't it take up like 2 chairs at one point? Like there was like an
Well,
in and an
right,
out.
and I want to be careful in how I'm saying this because it had more to do with the dinosaur like quality of old business systems. For a long time, stuff was still being done on hard copy.
Oh
Like the
yeah,
packaging would get printed out, and the proofreader would make notes, and then I, as the copywriter, would read the notes, and I would make. There was a lot of stuff going back and forth on paper, and this system existed for years. But when I first came in, I was like, why can't we just do this digitally and then the proofreader corrects my copy and yeah, no one wants to be the person that is bucking the way things are done. And literally, like the year, 2 years before the pandemic and all of that, I finally, things had broken down to the point where, like, I actually got to know the proofreader was assigned to us quite well. And then we were talking, and then she was like, it'd be really nice if I could just get your copy and correct it, and then we could send my corrected copy out. And I was like, yeah, I agree. And then it was like, oh, let's do that.
and then
So,
pandemic.
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But it
And then
was this thing where, like, everyone on all sides of this slowly grinding millstone is going, wait, wouldn't it be smoother if we did this? But no one can see each other. No one can hear each other. No one can talk. Everyone's just stuck in their corner pushing it around.
Sure.
And then finally the wheel got small enough to see the person on the other side and go, hey, let's move it over here.
George was our guide to understanding your guys's bureaucracy level because there was no map, like we didn't know who was, because we had moved from one division to the other. And but Dan and I kind of needed that because it was just kind of hard to know, but we figured it out, and it all continued to work, which was it was very interesting
No,
experience.
and the exciting thing for me now being back in the position of being a fan is, thankfully George is there, and it's still working. And like, this month, I'm very excited. There's a new Looney, not to promote, but I've promoted Grindhouse. I can promote Warner Archive. I'm very excited about
What do you
Looney
think we
Tunes
do on
Volume
this
2.
podcast, Daniel? What do you think we do on this podcast, Daniel? We promote Warner Archive titles,
and
please.
I'm super excited about Tarzan the Ape Man.
Yes.
I mean, it's like at least once a week. I mean, once a month, George just gets a text from me going, "Oh, I'm so excited! Blah 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 is coming up."
Yeah, we're still fans. In fact, the reason why Dan got hired in the first place was people would start coming to me and asking me all these weird questions, not just about Warner Archive product, but about regular Warner Brothers product, because a lot of people didn't know how to find the legacy packaging, right? Maybe they could find the VHS, but they didn't know at the WB shop. They wouldn't know if there was like a booklet that had come in the packaging, and so they would come to me, and I'd go, "Hold on," and I'd call Dan, and Dan was home at the time with a newborn child, and I'd be like, "Dan, can you open up your Babylon 5 season 2? Is there a booklet?" And Dan would be like, "Hold on," and he'd be like, "Yes," and I go, "Thanks." And then I'd hang up the phone and I'd be like, "Yes, there's a booklet." And they'd be like, "Oh, thanks, Matt." And so they thought that I was like Dan, but then the time came where they needed a copywriter, and I'm like, "Here's the guy who you guys thought I was, but I was just calling him. Now you can have him sit here and ask him directly."
So now the truth is out. You were riding Dan's coattails for years.
Totally.
And
Dan made me who I am today.
still you are, yes. Uh, well, that's so, it's some great stories in talking about how the business was. And hopefully people are still listening and they find it interesting.
You never know.
You never know.
But
We do.
the core of it all has been George, and
Oh
he
yeah.
continues to be. And I think you
Yeah.
just mentioned that, Daniel, that it's like, thank God that George is still there, because to your point there, Matt, you were calling Dan, but guess who everybody else calls?
Oh yeah.
George.
Oh yeah.
You pick
Oh,
up the phone and they're like, "Do you know where XYZ, or do you know anything about?" And there's one person you can pick up the phone and you can call. It's George. And if he doesn't know it, click, click, click. You hear his typewriter, you hear the keyboard going. And then if he doesn't know off the top of his head,
one-handed typist George.
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
George always phone in one hand, other hand on the keyboard. Yes.
Exactly.
Yep.
Multitasking. And then and so it's like, we're so fortunate. And when people say, "Hey, why don't we get this? Why don't we get more of that? Why don't we have this? Why is there no extras?" I say, look, it's a battle. It's a battle to get any title out these days. It's really a challenge because of all the obstacles and the fact that the staff has just been depleted for so much of this. And there's only so much time in a day, in a week, and so much resources. So I think, I mean, people might think I'm, wow, Tim's very optimistic, but I'm like, 6 titles, 8 titles. Are you kidding me? In a month? It was only a year ago we were like having 1 title in a month.
Yep.
Yeah, it's going up.
To be back to that kind of larger cycle is a great thing.
And
good sign.
and not to make it all about George, but George's patience in dealing, because he's been through the up and downs of the studios and the systems and the formats, and he knows how to play the long game really well. And the end game is always just to get the stuff out there.
Yeah, representing George has always represented the voice of the fans, right? And how do you represent that voice among the businessmen? And it's really tricky. And George has been doing it a long time. Dan and I would love when George would tell stories about because he got into the business first with 16 millimeter when he was in college, right?
Well, this is a funny true story. Is when I was a kid, before home entertainment really was a thing, my brothers and I would save our allowances and the money we made working at my dad's camera store and all of that. And we would rent 16 millimeter films from Films Incorporated, and we would show them in our living room, and we'd invite people over, and everyone would put like 50 cents or $1 in the coffee can, and we would project like Rebel Without a Cause or Wizard of Oz, whatever. And we would rent these films, and these were like the 16 millimeter versions that would go to like colleges and high schools, and we would just rent them and show them at home because we had a 16 millimeter projector. And that was sort of the beginning of one of the beginnings of sort of my film fandom. And then lo and behold, years later, I'm having a conversation with George, and George is like, "Oh yeah, I had the Northeast. I did that catalog you guys were ordering from.
Right.
You in point of fact were ordering those movies from me."
Yeah.
Right. It's full circle. It's amazing.
And then he got into the early days of home video, and he talks about working for Golan and Globos early on. And he does this fantastic story that when I first met him, he talked about working for those guys and how they'd be like, "George, you have to sell lemon popsicle for $99.99. Lemon popsicle will be." And George is like, "What?" But they would sell thousands of copies of lemon popsicle for $99.99. Like because people wanted these movies, even if they were Israeli porkies, right? Like it's just it's insane. And the reason why I found out that story is when I first started, just the year before, Netflix had just launched with their streaming service, which came free. I bought a Roku and I watched everything on it. But the film libraries then were insane, and they had Lemon Popsicle 1, 3, 4, and 7 on Roku. And I just brought it up, and then he starts telling the story, and he goes, "Well, they don't have 2 and 5 because 2 and 5 are with this library and blah, blah, blah." And I'm just staring at him like, oh my God, he's the human pro IMDb thing. Like,
Right.
insane.
Yeah. The walking database.
Yeah.
That's
And
George.
so I just was like, absorb. So it's just, but that scope of the business, right, is invaluable because while it's changed, it always stems from that people want to see these films, and they want to see them the best way they can. That's it.
They want to not only see them, they want to own them.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that
they want to hold them.
Yeah. And it's great. I mean, if you're like if you're short on shelf space or room a disc is this thin. Just remove the art.
Oh God,
no. Take the art out of the Blu-ray box if you need to.
Yeah.
If you need the space, and keep the disc. If you're really tight on space, you're living in an apartment or whatever. Now, you're like, keep it. But we know that just below the camera there are boxes. Blu-ray cases.
Don't be me.
Yeah,
I'm a future episode of Storage Wars.
Now, I say do that, but I don't do that. I keep every Blu-ray in the disc because I like how they look, and it keeps them orderly. If I take them out, then I'm like, they're slipping all over. But
Dan knows that I love finding obscure formats of films and gifting them to people because we found a shelf full of HD DVDs of Alexander. And when people just see that red HD DVD of that fine film and they say, "What am I supposed to do with this?" That's what I live for.
Wait, what's HD DVD? You mean 4K?
Oh no, Dan.
Oh
no.
I remember there was 2-3 years when it was between
Blu-ray versus HD DVD.
And we would literally have to do separate menus. We'd have to do separate master. I mean, like, it was a pain to do that, and nobody was like, "Well, we don't know which one's going to win."
They did,
and it was harkening back to VHS Betamax. So
WB won because they got $1 billion from Sony to cut off HD DVD, and that was they were on the 8th floor at the time, that business unit, because I made, and this is one of my most beautiful website designs, a website called redtoblue.com for Warner Brothers, where you would exchange your HD DVD for a Blu-ray disc.
Okay. All right. Well,
yeah, it was a service.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
The behind the scenes mechanisms of corporate, corporations and the money that's exchanged. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
No, I mean, still remember that, like, in leading up to that, the Blu-ray versus HD DVD, there was, behind the scenes, if you were following stuff in the forums and things, there was a real effort to get everyone to agree so we wouldn't have a format war. Everyone knew that was not the good solution, and even with all this knowledge, we still had a format war.
Yeah. I was thinking that there are quite a few boutique labels now that are putting out a ton of product. And even though people are like, "Oh, woe is me, the end of physical media," it's like, really? Okay. I mean, when it comes to, are you selling, the millions of copies of the newest release? Maybe not, but that's in part to do with theatrical changes as well, not just home entertainment changes. If you ask me, because there's probably been a lot of movies that went straight to streaming that didn't do anywhere close to the numbers that it used to do in theatrical either. So there's a lot more to it than just the physical media purchase. The whole industry has changed. COVID's hit and theaters were shut down. Like, there's a lot, and we'll never be able to go back and untangle that web. But in the now, there's a lot of stuff being released. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, there's an audience, and as long as there's an audience, someone is going to move in to fill that audience's needs. And, if it's too small, or the perception is that it's too small for the big players to do it, then the boutiques are going to come in, and thank God, because these catalogs are sitting there, and they know how to get it out, and the work that they're doing, it's great. And here's the thing, is you've got someone like George ensuring that what gets mastered looks as good as it possibly can, which then, the guys at Vinegar and the guys at Arrow and the guys at Shout, who are licensing the material, they're getting access to better masters. And then when they're making them themselves, everybody's raising each other's standards. And, the stuff that like Arrow and Vinegar and Shout, all of these guys are doing, there's really, really good stuff all in the pipeline that's all coming out, which is, kind of surprising for a dead format.
Right.
Yeah. Like, what is your company's value add, right? And so Warner Brothers, it was our catalog. And so the value add that we had is, it was in some kind of format. We remaster it and release it. And if it didn't have any extras, the value was it looks better than before, right? But now that
or you never could get it.
Yeah,
or you never could get it.
Yep. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Sorry. Yes. But then if you license that master to somebody like a Shout Factory, what they're going to do, their value add is all of their extras that they can do, because that's what they own. That's what they can do. And they can turn around and sell that to their audience who wants a curated experience. And then they can put that in front of people who, like, Dan and I might have been able to reach them, right? But they have a dedicated audience who wants all that material and that impriture. And it works.
And there's a reciprocal relationship. Like when, this stuff gets licensed out to a boutique label, and the boutique label does a new 4K scan, that 4K scan doesn't disappear. It stays with the title and it enters the greater ecosystem, and suddenly, moving ahead, people have access to a new form of digital preservation that has higher resolution. And, as the technology changes, whatever it becomes, there's a new format which gives it longer legs, which gets you into the next decade and the decade after that. And then, I
4K.
mean, eventually the televisions will be beyond what our human eyes can take in, and then we're going to have to wear special goggles. But that's for the Sonys and the Samsungs to handle.
Yeah, that's
4K
you're
has
just talking format distribution.
Yeah.
yeah, but 4K has allowed a new level of mastering that and a sales window, right? Like even if from a 4K you can get even a better Blu-ray than before, and it again, as Dan was saying, it's an ecosystem. A label that I like to follow is AGFA, the American Genre Film Archive, which is a nonprofit. But what they've been doing is not only have they been taking like in working with like Alamo and other people, right? Some of these labels, like a Shout, will maybe release it physically, but then AGFA will take that and distribute a 4K theatrically, right? So you can get a day and date theatrical release to markets like in Texas or whatever that can coincide with your disc and or digital release. And also they have partnered with some people who don't have the ability to release a disc and partner together and release 4Ks. And then because they're a nonprofit, they've turned around and used that money that they've raised to go into forgotten libraries by forgotten or underserved filmmakers and start digitizing these very unknown, very on the edge, almost lost films, which only existed in whispers, and releasing it. And that's an incredible, like maturation of, because at first it was like, hey, a Danny Kaye film is available, right? Like people kind of know who that is. But when you go out to an artist who made a film for regional drive-in theaters in Texas about like horror houses, and it was released in 2 theaters, and then the negative sat in someone's garage, right? And nobody saw it. Now you get distribution for that. Like that's such a huge jump, and just really fascinating.
Well, I think the observation I've made is that the quality of the Warner Archive releases is probably unmatched or unsurpassed by anybody
And
out
it's
there.
funny you should say that, because when we started, all we heard was the opposite.
Oh,
And,
really?
yeah.
It took a long time.
The most common thing we would hear, and became something we would say at work because we heard it so much online, was if we were putting something out and it was announced, then online
You're going to
in
say the word.
in the forums, it was, oh my God, it's relegated to the archive. And it was, people, were very upset that we were putting it out. And it was,
And not you
Instead
guys.
of instead of the main home entertainment.
Yeah, they were like,
Yeah.
it needs a proper release.
It was, we were the Bad News Bears and you guys were the Yankees. And it was like, why are they sending red dust to the Bad News Bears? But, thanks to a lot of hard work of George and Terry and Tech
all the
Ops,
labs,
all the labs, and
FBI,
eventually the proof was in the pudding they cooked, and then everyone went, "Oh, these are actually really good."
Right.
But it took a long time to get there, both in terms of being able to deliver the product, but also the perception. The perception curve was much longer than the actual delivery.
I had a director when we were releasing like an out of print DVD, right? Like he had a release through HBO, and we were re-releasing it because it had been out of print for
It
like
went out
5
of
or
print,
6 years.
which is a lot of what was, one of the benefits of the way we did stuff is something that went out of print. We were able to bring it back into print so people could get it.
And he said to me, "Well, I'm a little disappointed that it's coming back in print from you because you don't have any extras." And I looked at him and I go, "Wait, do you think like if we took the extras off the disc, that would actually be very expensive to do. We're just taking your disc and ripping it and re-releasing it. Like what you're, we're not taking anything away. It's just back in print the way it was. Like that, but that's part of that perception process, right? People just thought that somehow it's like a stripped down version. But
Mhm.
it just that doesn't even make economic sense. But if you're not in the business, you don't know how these things are made or how they're manufactured or burned, or not familiar with ISO files, you could see how emotionally people would react to it. It was an understandable reaction, but it just Dan and I, and would forget that people weren't living this literally every day of their lives.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I think the big thing that I take away from seeing all these other companies, even if the quality of their master is not the same level of Warner Archive, is that I think if we go back to the dark ages of not offering films to people, you know what they're going to do? They're going to
Yep.
pirate it.
Oh yeah.
Right.
And
Bootlegs.
Oh yeah.
the studio spent so much money fighting piracy, trying to get people to understand, please, these are valuable works of art. Please don't pirate them and show them in this low res format and sell that. You're robbing us. It's illegal. And piracy is no good for the business. If you hoard stuff, if you don't release it, if whatever, people will rip it and they will, to get their own physical media copy. So
Right.
it does no good for the industry or the fans to do it.
And
Not do it.
time has proven that like the best way to combat piracy is to make the stuff available easily in a good quality format. People will choose not to pirate like that if you just make it able for them to access it. It's when you pull stuff away, it's when you hide it, it's when you bury it, it's when you don't put it out that they
Was that
find
a
this.
print? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And then suddenly there's weird editions on eBay that you don't know where they came from, or people are going to Russian sites and getting their computers full of viruses.
And I
Now,
think that the streamers have not maybe been down that road quite the same. I know there's password sharing and other things they have to deal with. But if you see a show on Max or Netflix or something that's an original and they never release it on physical media and you really want it, they're not only are they losing out on potential revenue, but they're just setting up the basis for piracy in the future as
Right.
well. So,
Right.
if you have an audience for a show, release it.
Right.
You,
And if
you, can, you can wait a year or two if you want, but eventually, please release it. Let
Yep.
people own it.
And people will wait for that and buy it, even if they have seen like a crappy quality floating around the
I think
internet or yeah.
an example of that is The Mandalorian, which is very
Yep.
popular on Disney Plus. I love that show myself. It took a few years,
Yep.
and part of it was for various reasons that they were holding back. But it's got some beautiful artwork. They're releasing it. It's coming out if it's not already out by the time this is aired, and people are going to gobble that up.
And
People
people are
want to own it, and you can still go back to Disney Plus and stream it if you want to tonight.
and people are noticing that this stuff actually still looks noticeably better in its physical format as opposed to the streaming.
By far. When I put it on my 4K monitor, and it's a Blu-ray or a 4K, obviously,
Yep.
yeah.
I'm getting the best quality right there, and then the audio.
Well, that's like all of. I mean,
audio.
this is a whole other too long conversation, but like so much of what people perceive visually is actually the audio system. Like Matt and I just saw the new Godzilla -1, fantastic film, and we saw it in IMAX. But what really made that film great visually was the sound system.
Right.
Yeah, we came out of it. I'm like, well, you don't have to see it in IMAX, but the sound was
so
a character, right?
Yep.
In IMAX.
Right.
And there's a critical moment in the film. This is not a spoiler because it's just about the soundtrack, but the soundtrack goes silent.
Yep.
And it's so powerful and so noticeable because it's like all of a sudden you just kind of realize like I was and you focus right on the screen, right? Like without such an amazing sound system, it would still work, but the impact in the theater, because all the vibration, right? Everything just stopped. So good. Like
Yeah,
that's what I want to package up and keep
yeah.
in my
And
head.
that just clicked in my brain. We're coming up on Oscar season. And last year, when they removed having during the live broadcast some of the
Oh, yeah.
categories like sound, and I was, along with the people who actually did the work, but
Yeah.
as just a fan, I was like,
Yeah.
are you kidding me? A
Yep.
huge part of the experience is the sound. If you pull out sound editing and relegate them to something else, people will not understand the importance of the sound editing, the score, all of this
Yep.
stuff that you don't see, but it's a part of the movie experience.
I am so not jealous of the people who put on the Academy Awards, because that is one heck of a show to produce. Like, what do you show? What do you not show? And everybody's eyes are on it, right?
Right.
But yes, and that and the musical numbers and stuff are part of the live show, right? The show itself is like about all the different parts of what goes into movies. It's
Yeah.
the movie's day. And
Yeah.
you know what, Dan, I'm speaking about sound. On the studio tour, Dan and we did the Gravity.
Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
good.
They
Yeah.
they
They
did
had a similar thing at the Academy Museum where it was the opening sequence to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and as it was running, they layered in each layer of soundtrack. So like you heard the wild sound, and then eventually at the end you do in the score, and it was really great. It was also funny because I was like, oh wait, that's Alfred Molina, but yeah. When they're layering in the music, and it was the same thing with Gravity on the studio tour, where like you take everything away and one by one you add each sound component, you realize what an important part of a film sound design and sound editing
And
is.
you're
And
in an environment designed for sound, right? You're
Yeah.
right.
also in the perfect place for it, and it really hammers it in for anybody who is not a sound designer how important it is.
Well, we'll bring this back to the Warner Archive as well with the sound, because we were talking about how great the picture is looking with these restorations. But George hammers it home, and I
Oh,
do too. When I remember to do it,
yeah.
there's been a sound restoration,
Yeah.
and at times I'm not as familiar with some of the really old movies, like
Yeah.
20s and 30s, and I'm listening to them, and I might be a little critical because my sound system, uh,
Mhm.
you can hear some of the static and things of that nature. But then you think, this is over
Yeah.
90 years old? Are
Yeah.
you kidding me? Of
Right.
course the sound is going to be not pristine.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can actually understand the words, these
Yeah.
were very early days of sound recording in
Yes.
many of these films. And so that restoration to make it just so you can put it in and actually understand and see and experience it is pretty amazing. And really, that's a reason to own, because you can watch it on TCM, that's fine, but you're not going to get that if you have a surround sound at home like I do. You're
Yep.
not going to get that whole thing,
Yep.
plus the night at the movies and all of the extras that are on there.
And the technology is such these days that you can go big and have your Atmos at home, but sound bars are getting so good, you can get pretty close on a budget and still have that experience at home.
That's me. Soundbar.
Well, I have both. I have one room, where I have a surround
Right.
sound, and then I've got a Sonos in the living room, and it's great. It really
Yep.
is. So even that, but yeah, and I understand things are expensive, and everybody has limited budgets. But the fact that you could own a movie from 1929 or 1932, and you paid $19 for it, and it's been fully remastered and sound,
Right.
and
Right.
has like 30 minutes worth of extras. Are you kidding me?
Right.
I mean, I understand people want to wait for a sale. It'll drop $3, but please support the archive so they can do the good work of getting it all done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And don't just wait for sales. I understand if 6 titles come out, kind of like you guys said, in a month, only 3 may interest you, and you may only have the money to buy 2. Understandable,
Yeah.
then
Or
you have to
one.
wait until, or 1, and so you have to wait until you can afford to buy it, and then maybe by that time, maybe it will be on sale. But if you could try to at least support the industry and what's being done by buying
Yeah.
some at full price, that helps the work that George is
Especially
doing.
when full price is $20. It's just like, come on, people.
It's been the same full price for 30 years.
Because
That's a
what's
good
$20
point.
now?
You know?
Everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when you track back, what is $20 is now unfortunately
Five.
just under an entree price at a restaurant.
Yeah.
You
Oh, good
know?
Lord. Just going to fast food.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
It's not. Dan and I used to say like, oh, a download price should be around what somebody's paying for a cup of coffee. And since we said that, the price of coffee,
It's higher than a download.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it is not unusual for somebody to get a tall holiday drink at Starbucks for $7.
Yep.
A download to own is $5, right?
right.
It's like
Yeah.
cheaper than a holiday coffee, and that money, goes a lot of it goes to Amazon, but a lot of it goes to the studio, and that
Sure.
even that's like helpful. Like it's just like there's all different ways. There's no one correct way to enjoy a film, but there are the corrector ways.
Yeah.
That's I have an opinion, but I really just am glad, especially with all the way that home entertainment has gone in the last 10-15 years, that there's more stuff now out there than has ever been available for more before, and more cheaply than ever. And that just means the love of film and TV, especially history, can spread.
And that is actually a good point, maybe more succinctly made, is since everyone started talking about the death of physical media, more stuff has been released on physical media than had been released previously. And that's true.
Yeah. Just Warner Archive alone, when
Yep.
Dan and I left, it was like 3,700 titles, I believe, were still in print, right? Like that's it. That is more than a lifetime of material. Dan and I know because we watched over half of it for preparation for the podcasts.
Yeah. 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 I think that the more people say the death of physical media, it's almost like the bad press is better than no press kind of a thing. It keeps it in front of people.
Yeah,
And
I mean, yeah,
part of it too, though, Dan, is that there's been very little coming out in theaters.
yeah.
And so it's like, between these three choices in theaters, would I want to watch any of those? Or what's on the streaming services? Or would I just rather watch a movie I know I love that I haven't seen in a year or two and I can pull it off my shelf?
Yeah.
Or, hey, it's now out on Blu-ray. I want to buy that and enjoy it. And, if you go to the movie theater here in LA, it's about $15 or more,
Or
unless
more.
you go on a half price Tuesday or something and you're a member of one of these theaters or something like that.
A ticket
And
price.
that's
and
almost the same as buying the Blu-ray.
Yeah, it's almost there.
It won't be long before it will be, probably.
I've been loving the streaming services because, believe it or not, there are a lot of classic films from other studios that I haven't seen, or like maybe what we'll say like A-list titles that you guys would release, but always were passing me by. And so I've been able to catch up on like all these movies that I have been putting off watching because, we were watching so much stuff for work, and it has been fantastic for me. I have enjoyed it. I've been going on disc sales. Like I like it's very liberating as a customer to just follow my fancy and
Well,
have
it's
it
also
fulfilled.
for literally for years, Matt's had to hear me say, like, eventually physical media becomes vinyl. And
Yeah.
the people that really love it are going to, and it's going to be vinyl. It's going to be thought of vinyl. And with the most recent round of death of physical media stories in the media, already there's been like 2 or 3 stories where somebody has said, well, maybe it's going to be like vinyl. And it's like, it kind of already is.
There are VHS only stores here in LA. They have VHS screenings.
Hasn't it been for the last few years that vinyl has outsold CDs when it comes to music?
Yeah.
Which it's like, what? that's shocking, and yet it's not shocking. The analog experience that people still want to enjoy.
And yet no one's running around saying, "Oh, don't put anything out on vinyl. They can listen to it on Spotify." They do both.
I have a daughter and Daniel, you have a son or daughter,
Daughter.
and daughter, yeah, and she wants to listen to the older music. And you know what was interesting is she's like, "Oh, I know that song. I know that song. Like it's from the 70s, 80s, 90s." I'm like, "How do you know that song?" She goes, "It's in one of my games on Roblox." I said, she goes, "Yeah." She goes, "When you're going around, I don't know which game it is." She's like, "They play snippets of these songs. They must have the rights. They pay royalties for it, obviously." And I'm like, "So you know the song?" I'm like, "So let's play it." And we've enjoyed more music of that she didn't grow up with, that I love, because of that game, which is interesting. So in other words, anytime you put the lid on something, somebody else blows it off and uses that
Yeah.
in some modern video game. Do you remember when was it rock? Was it
Yeah,
the
Rock Band and
Rock Band? You know
Oh,
how
yeah.
popular that was, and
Yeah.
people were playing songs from the '60s.
Yeah.
Young kids, they didn't know the song until they played the game.
And a whole bunch of heavy metal bands found a second life because people
Exactly right.
rediscovered their
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
I had oddly the reverse experience, is that I was playing it and I learned all the music of 2006 of what is popular.
Well, there's that too, and it's
And
wonderful.
I know all the
because
words because I would do the singing, right? I
Yeah.
love that game so much. But
Yeah.
kids are very good now at following the rabbit hole, right? They find
Right.
something of interest and they've learned to research themselves very quickly. So if they encounter something in a video game or a show or even like a YouTube video or a Discord, they can, ping pong their way through like stuff that would have taken us, years to accumulate and get an understanding of. And that's very powerful. And so, and they're free to follow their,
Yeah.
fancy, right? And their special interest, and it can become theirs. They
And
have
and
ownership of that.
because of YouTube, now you can see snippets from movies for free, not the whole
Yeah.
movie,
Yeah.
but you can see snippets. You can see some of the trailers,
Trailers.
and then of course for music, my daughter, if she is interested in a song, she'll pull up the old music video, and some of them don't look that great. They haven't aged well, but around Halloween, you've got all the Thriller and all of the old, videos for the horror movies and things, and Ghostbusters, and it's fun. It's actually fun for me to watch with her. And but I think the point that I was trying to get to that is that's at one age. As she gets a little bit older, she gets introduced to some of the older movies, and I'm not talking about 90-year-old movies. I'm talking about pre 1990.
Right.
Yeah.
Those movies, she's going to be, she's going to be falling in love with some of those movies too. I mean, Home Alone, pre 1990, we watch every year.
Yeah.
Christmas Vacation. There's still some because they're seasonal that we watch. Beetlejuice, and
Yeah.
so it's a great way with the physical media to go back, and the streaming provides for that too. Of course, opportunities where they have it.
Yeah.
So.
It's a fine future.
Well, guys, this was a lot of fun. I have no idea how I'm going to promote this episode.
Good luck. We'll promote it.
Wait.
I have at
Speaking
least
of
3
promotion,
fans.
Matt, earlier you mentioned you had a film you worked on Amazon. What was that film called again?
Yes, that is called Lunamancer. You can go to lunamancer.com to find out where it's playing. It's right now on Amazon, and it'll be on Google Play as soon as I get a file over to them, and
What you're
beyond.
going to do right after we get off here, you're going to get that file
That
over
was on my to-do list to follow up on that. And
I
the
have
way-
nothing to promote but
no,
myself.
you do.
So look for me on LinkedIn.
No, Dan and I were doing Archive Guys podcast. We stopped doing it when Dan and I took a project that is still going on right now. It's been a little over a year of us working on a fast TV channel for Conan O'Brien. Dan and I made, by the end of January, we will have made 340 half-hour clip programs of Conan O'Brien, 10-year period over Conan O'Brien's career, which is the #1 channel still on Samsung TV Plus. It's been very interesting, but we haven't had the time to continue doing the podcast. But Dan, that's what we're going to be doing when we're done. Are you excited, Dan? We're going back to podcasting.
We're going back to podcasting. I didn't know that. All right.
Yeah, it
all right.
tastes so much better.
On the extras, just announced. Well, hey, you can thank me later for putting the promotion 2 hours into the podcast when nobody is listening.
We love to bury the lead.
We'll say skip to the end for Dan and I where we talk about what we're doing now.
Listen to the end for a somewhat special announcement.
Well, it's good to catch up with you guys. Now, finally, people can stop emailing me, or not emailing, posting and saying, "What happened to those guys?"
No, keep emailing Tim, and then let's get George on, and all three of us could talk about Warner Archive movies for 40 minutes, which would be great.
I can't remember, and if you're still listening, the person who first said to me, "Hey, I have a suggestion. Why don't you get Dan and Matt back on?" And I'm like, "Well, that's a great idea." But they have their own podcasts and they're very busy. And then, lo and behold, we run into each other the other day at that book signing. And I find out that you guys actually do have the time. And it was great fun to reconnect.
Yeah. Turns out Dan and I are really approachable and very easy. You'd think we'd be in demand. But there were a lot of strikes recently. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Oh, is that why you couldn't go on because
we're in support.
We'll work for discs.
Oh God,
which is basically what you did before, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Nothing's changed.
I got so many discs.
Well, it was a lot of fun. I know I learned a few things and had a few laughs. So that's what it's all about.
We just want you to laugh.
Right.
That's the goal. Dan's goal.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.